placed the ring on the table without a single tear. 300 people watched. No one moved. No one spoke. The man she had loved for 3 years had just announced his engagement to another woman in the same ballroom where he once whispered she was his future. Clara Whitmore did not beg. She did not break. She simply walked away. But the real story wasn't about what she lost that night. It was about what she became after. If you've ever been left behind by someone who didn't deserve you, this story is for you. Subscribe. Stay until the end and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The ring sat on the edge of the silver tray like it weighed nothing at all. Clara Whitmore stared at it for one breath. Then two. Then she set it down, not with anger, not with trembling hands, but with the kind of quiet that only comes from a woman who has just understood something she can never unknow. She turned around. 300 people were watching her, and not one of them said a word. It had started as the most important evening of her life. That was what Clara had told herself when she laced up her blue gown, the pale blue one, the color of a winter sky just before dawn. She had chosen it deliberately. Nathaniel Ashford had once taken her hand at a spring picnic and said, "Clara, you should wear that color forever. It makes you look like you belong to something beautiful." She had kept that dress for 2 years, saved it, mended the hem twice. Tonight she believed was the night it was meant to be worn. The Ashford estate sat at the top of Broad Creek Hill, its windows blazing with candlelight so bright the glow could be seen from the Richmond Road a full mile away. Every carriage in the county had been summoned. Every family name that mattered had sent its finest. Clara had arrived with her father, George Whitmore, who walked with a cane now and smelled faintly of the worry that had settled into him since last harvest. That terrible harvest. The one that took everything but the roof over their heads. "You look beautiful," her father had said, squeezing her hand as they mounted the front steps. "Don't," she had answered not unkindly. "Don't say things that make me nervous." He had chuckled low and dry. 3 years is a long time, Clara. Tonight it pays off. She had believed him. God help her, she had believed him. Inside the Ashford ballroom. The night moved, the way wealth always moves, slowly, deliberately, with the confidence of people who have never had to rush for anything. Women in silk pressed close to speak secrets they'd repeat tomorrow. Men with silver watch chains debated politics over glasses of imported Madeira wine. A string quartet played from the corner soft and elegant beneath a chandelier that threw gold light over everything it touched. Clara moved through it carefully. She was not poor. Not yet, not officially. The Whitmore name still carried weight. Her grandfather had built the largest tobacco warehouse in Henrico County. But that was her grandfather. Her father was a different story, and everybody in this room knew it, even if no one said it aloud. She felt their eyes follow her. Not with cruelty, not yet. With the particular curiosity of people watching a gamble they haven't placed a wager on. Will Ashford choose her, or won't he? Margaret Holt appeared at Clara's elbow, dark-eyed and quick, her fan flicking open with practiced elegance. "You're here," Margaret said. Not warmly, observationally. "I was invited," Clara replied. Everyone was invited. Margaret's fan moved in 3 slow arcs. But not everyone came expecting something. "I'm not expecting anything," Clara said evenly. "I'm here because Nathaniel asked me to be here. Nathaniel asks a great many people, a great many things." Margaret tilted her head. "Did you know the Pembertons arrived this afternoon, all 3 carriages? Father, Mother, and Elizabeth." Clara kept her face calm. "I didn't know that." "Their cotton holdings alone are worth more than the entire Whitmore estate at its peak." Margaret said it lightly, like she was discussing the weather. "I'm only telling you because I thought you should know, as a friend." "Thank you, Margaret," Clara said, "for your friendship." She walked away before Margaret could read anything in her eyes. She found Nathaniel near the fireplace at the far end of the room. He was exactly as she had memorized him, tall with the kind of broad shoulders that made a room feel safer. Dark hair pushed back from a face that had always struck her as honest. He had a laugh that came easily, and eyes that could make a woman feel like the only person in any given room. For 3 years, those eyes had been for her. Clara. He said her name quietly, stepped forward, took her hand and pressed it briefly. Not a kiss. Just pressure. You look well? She studied him. There was something different tonight, something that moved behind his expression, like weather behind glass. Nathaniel, she said. Is there something I should know? He looked away first. That told her everything, but she refused to let herself understand it yet. Tonight is an important night for the family, he said. There are expectations. There have always been expectations, Clara interrupted gently. That's never stopped us before. Clara. He said her name again, and this time it sounded like an apology. My father and I have been in discussion for several months now. There are financial realities that... Nathaniel. Her voice was very quiet. Look at me. He looked at her. Whatever you're about to do, she said, do it quickly, please. He opened his mouth, closed it. Then someone across the room called his name. His father, Harlan Ashford, white-haired and commanding, gesturing toward the center of the ballroom. Nathaniel said, I have to go. And he left her standing by the fireplace. She knew. In the 12 minutes that followed, she knew. She watched Nathaniel cross the room. She watched him take his position at the center of the floor as the quartet faded. She watched his father raise a glass and begin speaking with the smooth authority of a man who has controlled rooms his entire life. Harlan Ashford spoke about legacy, about the responsibilities of great families, about the future of Virginia and the men and women who would shape it. He spoke for 4 minutes. Then Nathaniel stepped forward, and Clara felt something inside her chest go very, very still. It is my honor, Nathaniel said, his voice carrying clearly across the ballroom, to announce my engagement to Miss Elizabeth Pemberton of Charleston. A young woman appeared from the crowd, 22, fair-haired, dressed in the kind of pale gold that costs more than most people earn in a year. She smiled with perfect composure and took Nathaniel's arm. The room erupted. Applause. Laughter. Congratulations called across the crowd. 300 people celebrating. And Clara Whitmore standing absolutely still in a pale blue dress, holding a glass of wine she could no longer feel in her hand. She did not cry. She wanted to. God, she wanted to, but something in her refused to give this room that satisfaction. Margaret Holt found her within seconds. Of course she did. Oh, my dear, Margaret said, and she actually sounded sorry. Did he not tell you? He told me enough, Clara said. You should sit down. I look fine, Clara said. She looked for her father. Found him across the room, his face white as chalk cane gripping the floor, eyes moving from Nathaniel to Clara and back again with the expression of a man watching a building he'd loved burn slowly to the ground. Clara set her wine glass on the nearest table. She walked not fast, not slow toward Nathaniel. People parted for her. They always do for someone moving with that particular quality of stillness. Nathaniel saw her coming. She watched something flicker across his face, regret maybe, or relief that she wasn't weeping. Elizabeth Pemberton watched her with the composed curiosity of a woman who has already won and knows it. Clara stopped in front of Nathaniel. She reached into the small silk purse at her wrist. Withdrew the ring, the simple gold band with the pale stone he'd given her on a rainy Tuesday evening 2 Aprils ago, when he'd knelt in the mud of her father's garden and told her she was the only woman in the world he could imagine building a life with. She held it out to him. Nathaniel, she said, and her voice did not shake, not one syllable. I spent 3 years loving you well. I don't regret a single day of it, but I will not spend one more day being useful to you. Nathaniel said nothing. His jaw was tight. His eyes were not quite meeting hers. Take it, she said. He took the ring. The room had gone quiet enough that people 3 groups away had stopped mid-sentence to listen. Clara looked at him for one more moment, really looked the way you look at something you are choosing to let go of. And then she said simply, clearly for the entire room to hear, Thank you, Nathaniel. Tonight you showed me the difference between being loved and being chosen for your usefulness. I hope she makes you very happy. I hope someday that matters to you." She turned. She walked through the crowd, which parted now not from politeness, but from something that looked a great deal like awe. She retrieved her shawl from the entrance hall. She walked out the front door. And the moment she stepped into the night air, dark and warm, alive with the sound of crickets and the distant smell of honeysuckle, she pressed one hand flat against the stone wall of the Ashford estate and let herself shake. Just once. Just for a moment. Then she straightened her back, drew her shawl around her shoulders, and walked down the drive toward the road. She had gone perhaps a quarter mile when she heard boots on gravel behind her. She turned, half expecting Nathaniel, and found a stranger. He was taller than Nathaniel, broader, somewhere around 30, maybe a few years past that, with the kind of face built for honest weather and hard decisions. Not handsome, the way Nathaniel was handsome, but solid. Real. He wore a dark riding coat trail-worn at the cuffs, and he held his hat in one hand. "Ma'am," he said, stopping a respectful distance back. He had a Kentucky cadence to his voice, low, unhurried, the kind of voice that didn't waste itself. "I don't mean to startle you. I was just cutting through the drive on my way to the road. My horse is at the post up ahead." "Then we're going the same direction," Clara said. He studied her for a moment, not rudely, just honestly. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm quite well, thank you." He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push. He just fell into step beside her at a distance that was careful and respectful, and for a few seconds they just walked. Then he said quietly, "I was at the edge of the party, near the garden door. I heard what you said to him in there." Clara kept her eyes on the road ahead. "I imagine most of Richmond will have heard it by morning." "Probably so." A pause. "For what it's worth, you said it well." "Thank you." Another silence. Warm night air moving between them. "William Carter," he said. "I'm from Henderson County, Kentucky. I was in Richmond on land business. I didn't know the Ashfords personally. I was invited through a mutual acquaintance. I probably shouldn't have come." He said it with a dry self-awareness that surprised her into almost smiling. "Clara Whitmore," she said. "Richmond. I probably should have left an hour earlier." That made him exhale, not quite a laugh, but close. They reached the post where his horse was tied, a dark bay, large and calm, who turned its head at Carter's approach like it recognized someone trustworthy. Carter untied the reins. Then he reached into his saddlebag and drew out a wool coat worn soft with use. "It gets cold on the road after dark," he said, holding it out, "even in summer." "I'm not going far," Clara said. "Just to the road. My father will follow with the carriage." "I know," Carter said, "but take it anyway." She looked at him. There was nothing in his face that asked for anything. No performance, no pity. Just a person offering a coat to another person standing in the dark. She took it. It was heavy and warm and smelled like cedar and wood smoke. "You can send it back to Henderson County when you're finished with it," he said, his voice carrying that same dry, almost humor. "Or don't. I have others." Clara pulled it around her shoulders. For one moment, she felt something dangerously close to the urge to cry. Not about Nathaniel, not anymore, but about the simple, uncomplicated kindness of a stranger offering warmth without conditions. "Mr. Carter," she said, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask me anything, ma'am." "Do you believe people can change, start over, build something entirely new from what's been broken?" Howe was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of a man who didn't have an answer. The quiet of a man who was giving the question its due. "I reckon," he said at last, "that the people who start over successfully aren't the ones who pretend the wreckage didn't happen. They're the ones who learn to build with what's left." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "That's either very wise or very simple," she said. "In my experience," Carter replied, "the wisest things usually are." Headlights flickered at the far end of the drive. Her father's carriage lantern, she recognized the pattern. "That's my father," she said. She began to unwrap the coat. He held up one hand. "Keep it tonight," he said. "Return it when you don't need it anymore." He swung up into the saddle, settled his hat back on his head, and looked down at her. "Miss Whitmore, I hope tomorrow is better than tonight." "Mr. Carter," she replied, "tonight couldn't be much worse, so the odds are in my favor." That almost laugh again, and this time it was real. He tipped his hat once, turned the bay horse south, and rode away into the dark. Her father's carriage pulled up. George Whitmore descended before it had fully stopped Kane, and all his face still carrying that stunned gray quality. "Clara." "I'm fine, Papa." "He never told me. I swear to you I didn't know he was planning Papa." She took his arm, gently. "It's done. We'll fight it. Your mother's family still has connections in the county, and if I speak to Judge—" "No," she said firmly. "Clara, no." She looked at him, really looked past the embarrassment and the helplessness to the man underneath, the man who had loved her with everything he had, even when everything he had kept getting smaller. "Listen to me. We're not going to fight. We're not going to appeal. We're not going to chase after a man who chose someone else." George Whitmore's hands trembled slightly on his cane. "What are we going to do then?" he asked, his voice very small. Clara took a slow breath. Around her shoulders, she wore the coat of a man she'd only just met. Heavy and warm, smelling of cedar and wood smoke, and somehow that felt like a sign. Not a promise, not a rescue. Just a reminder that kindness existed outside of parlors and ballrooms, and all the careful arrangements of Virginia society. "We're going to go home," she said. "And tomorrow morning we're going to figure out what we actually have. Not what we lost. What we have." She guided her father toward the carriage. "And then?" he asked. "And then," Clara said, "I'm going to build something with it." That night, she sat at the small writing desk in her room, the coat still around her shoulders, and she wrote 3 words in the back of her journal. Not Nathaniel's name. Not a lament. Just start from here. She closed the journal. She set it aside. She looked out the window at the black Virginia sky, and thought about a man on a bay horse heading south who had given her his coat without asking for anything in return. Not even a thank you. Really, not the kind that expected reciprocation. And she thought that is what a person who knows his own value looks like. She wanted to know what that felt like. From the inside. 3 weeks later, she learned the full extent of what her father had kept from her. The debts were not small. They were not the kind that could be solved by selling the carriage or finding a better buyer for the south field. They were the kind that had accumulated across years. Bad seasons, worse decisions, pride that had kept George Whitmore from asking for help, until asking for help was no longer an option. The warehouse, her grandfather's warehouse, the one she had grown up visiting on Saturdays to watch men load barrels and feel like she was standing at the center of something important, was already in negotiation. Not her father's negotiation. The creditors. She found this out from the family's attorney, a dry-voiced man named Eustace Pratt, who had the manner of someone who delivered bad news so regularly that he'd forgotten it was bad. "The primary holdings will likely be liquidated within 60 days, Pratt said, arranging papers on his desk. "There may be a remainder depending on the outcome of the Broad Creek parcel sale, but I would not recommend planning around it." Clara sat very straight in the chair across from him. "What would you recommend?" she asked. Pratt looked at her over his spectacles with the kind of expression that men of his generation wore when speaking to a woman about money, not unkind exactly, but clearly expecting her to be receiving information rather than asking for options. "I would recommend," he said carefully, "that you speak with family, relatives who might be in a position to offer accommodation." "We have no relatives in a position to offer accommodation," Clara said. "What else?" He blinked. "Miss Whitmore, Mr. Pratt, I understand what you're saying. I'm asking you what else." He was quiet for a moment, recalibrating. "There is also," he said slowly, "the matter of a letter that arrived for your father last week. It was forwarded to my office when he was indisposed." He shuffled papers, found one, slid it across the desk. Clara picked it up. It was from Henderson County, Kentucky. "Dear Mr. Whitmore, we have not been formally introduced, but I had the occasion to meet your daughter briefly in Richmond this past month, and I understand you may be navigating some changes in your circumstances. I am in need of someone to oversee the running of a small community school on my land. It is modest work, but it is honest, and the pay is fair, and the position comes with adequate board. If Miss Whitmore would consider it, I would be glad to receive a reply. W. Carter's Landing, Henderson County. Clara read it twice. Then she set it down carefully, as if it were something fragile. "Do you know this man?" Pratt asked. "I met him once," Clara said, "for approximately 15 minutes. And yet he writes to your father. And yet he writes to my father." Clara agreed. She thought about the coat. The bay horse disappearing south into the dark. Build with what's left. "Mr. Pratt," she said, "I'll need to discuss this with my father, but I believe we may have a direction." She picked up the letter. She folded it with great care. She put it in her coat pocket, her own coat this time. And she walked out into the bright Virginia summer morning with the feeling tentative, fragile, but unmistakably present of something that was not quite hope yet, but was perhaps the beginning of the conditions necessary for hope. Her father fought her on it. "Kentucky," he said, like she'd suggested the moon. "Clara, I will not send my daughter to Kentucky." "You're not sending me," she said. "I'm going." "You don't know this man. You don't know anything about this." "I know he wrote a letter when he didn't have to. I know he offered work instead of charity. And I know," she said, meeting her father's eyes steadily, "that everything I knew here has either burned or been sold. So." George Whitmore sat heavily in his chair. The sitting room around them was beginning to look hollowed out, the good silver already gone. Several paintings absent from the walls, the carpet rolled to the side for inventory. "You were going to be the mistress of the Ashford estate," he said quietly. I know what you thought, Papa." Clara crossed the room and sat beside him. She took his hand, old and papery, now the hands of a man who'd worked hard and lost much of what he'd worked for. "But I think maybe we were both so busy planning for that future that we forgot to make sure we had the foundations for any future." He was quiet. "I'll be careful," she said. "I will write every week. And I'm not going forever. I'm going to learn something. I'm going to build something. With a schoolhouse in Kentucky. With whatever I have," she said. "Starting there." George Whitmore looked at his daughter for a long time. Then he said in a voice very different from the one he usually used, quieter, older, more honest, "Your mother would have liked this version of you." Clara's throat tightened. She did not cry. "Tell me the same thing in a year," she said, "when I've earned it." She wrote back to William Carter. The letter was short. "Mr. Carter, I accept your offer. I will arrive in Henderson County within the month, depending on travel arrangements. I am capable of basic accounting, correspondence, farm management, and I have been teaching reading to the children of our household staff for several years. I hope these skills are useful to you. I should also mention, I still have your coat. I will return it in person. Clara Whitmore." She posted it the same afternoon. Then she began to pack. Not much of what she owned was hers anymore, truly. The blue dress, she folded it carefully and left it on the bed. She didn't take it. Not because she was angry at it, but because the person who had worn it to the Ashford estate that night was gone now, and it seemed wrong to carry her along. She took practical things. Dark wool, good boots, her journal, the small box of her mother's letters, a book on land management she'd borrowed from her father's study years ago and never returned. She took Carter's coat. She did not look at Nathaniel Ashford's house as her carriage rolled past it on the road south. Not because she couldn't stand the sight of it, but because she found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she genuinely had no interest in looking backward. Whatever was ahead of her, it was in that direction, and she was going to it. The carriage rolled south through Virginia in the last heat of summer, through red clay roads and fields heavy with tobacco and the smell of cut grass, and Clara Whitmore sat by the window and watched the world move and felt for the first time in 3 years entirely and completely like herself. She didn't know what was waiting in Kentucky. She didn't know the man who had written her a letter without being asked to. She didn't know what she was capable of building, or how long it would take, or what it would cost. But she knew this. She had placed a ring on a silver tray. She had walked out into the dark, and she was still walking. The road to Kentucky was long, and it gave Clara too much time to think. She had expected that. What she hadn't expected was the way her mind refused to settle on Nathaniel, refused to replay the ballroom, the ring, the applause for another woman, and instead kept returning to something far simpler. A wool coat. A voice that didn't rush itself. Build with what's left. She pressed her hand flat against the window frame of the hired coach and watched Virginia blur into Tennessee. Tennessee into the wild green edges of Kentucky, and she made herself a promise. She whispered under her breath so the driver wouldn't hear it. I will not arrive broken. I will not let the first thing he sees be a woman who needs saving. I am going to work. I am going to learn. And I am going to be someone I can recognize when I look in a glass. She said it 3 times, like a prayer, like a dare. The coach rolled on. Carter's Landing was not what she had pictured. She wasn't sure exactly what she had pictured, something rougher. Probably something that matched the worn cuffs of the riding coat she'd borrowed, but it wasn't this. It was a working settlement, honest and unadorned, with a cluster of whitewashed buildings along a wide dirt road, fields stretching south and west, and a river just visible through the tree line to the east that caught the late afternoon light and held it. People moved through the main road with the particular purposefulness of people who have too much work to do and just enough daylight to do it in. Nobody stopped to stare at the carriage. Nobody came running to meet it. Clara liked that immediately. The driver pulled up in front of a long, low building with a covered porch. Before Clara could step down, the door opened, and a woman came out, 50 or so, iron-gray hair pulled back without apology, wearing a work apron dusted with flour, and the expression of someone who has seen enough of life to know exactly what she is looking at. You'll be Miss Whitmore, the woman said. I will, Clara agreed. I'm Ruth Hadley. I run the house for Mr. Carter. He's out on the south field, and he'll be another hour at least. Ruth studied her for a moment, frank and unhurried. You look tired. I've been traveling 5 days, Clara said. That'll do it. Ruth held the door. Come in then. I'll get you something hot, and you can rest before he gets back. Clara stepped up onto the porch with her one bag over her arm and Carter's folded coat in her hands. Mrs. Hadley, she said, stopping. What is he like, Mr. Carter? I want to know before I meet him properly. Ruth looked at her. There was something approving in it. Honest, Ruth said after a moment. Sometimes more honest than's comfortable. He doesn't say things he doesn't mean, and he doesn't promise things he can't deliver. He works harder than any man on this land. A pause. He's been alone a long time, not lonely alone. There's a difference. Yes, Clara said quietly. There is. Ruth nodded once like that. Answer had passed a test, neither of them acknowledged aloud, and went inside. Clara followed. Carter came back from the south field, while the sky was still light, but barely. Clara heard him before she saw him. Boots on the porch. A low word to someone outside, the particular sound of a man who moves through his own space without thinking about it. She was sitting at the long kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the land management book she'd brought from Virginia, which she'd been reading not out of nervousness, but because she genuinely wanted to understand what she was walking into. He came through the door and stopped when he saw her. How was dirtier than he'd been in Richmond Field, dirt on his boots and forearm shirt damp at the collar, and for a moment he just looked at her with the same unhurried quality she remembered, like a man who takes the full measure of a thing before reacting to it. Miss Whitmore, he said. Mr. Carter. She stood, held out the folded coat. I believe this is yours. He took it, looked down at it for a moment with something that might have been amusement. I didn't actually expect you to bring it, he said. I told you I would. You did. He set the coat over the back of a chair. How was the journey? Long, she said. I spent most of it reading this. She held up the book. You have clay soil on the south quarter. The drainage is going to be a problem if you're planning to expand the corn. He looked at the book, looked at her. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, and the expression on his face had shifted to something she couldn't quite name. Surprise maybe, or the early stages of respect. "I've been saying that for 2 years," he said. "My foreman disagrees." "Your foreman is wrong," Clara said. "The water table." "I know," Carter said. "Sit down, Miss Whitmore. Tell me what else you found in that book." She sat, and they talked for 2 hours while Ruth moved around the kitchen with the quiet satisfaction of a woman watching something she had hoped for begin to take its correct shape. The school was 4 walls and a wood stove, and 14 children who ranged in age from 6 to 15 and had the combined energy of a thunderstorm in a barn. Clara stood in the doorway on her first morning and looked at them and felt for the first time since Richmond. Something that was not grief and not determination, but something warmer and more complicated, something that felt almost like joy. "Good morning," she said. 14 faces turned to her, most of them wary, several openly skeptical. One small girl in the front row with red braids and serious eyes who looked at Clara like she was something worth watching. "I'm Miss Whitmore," Clara said. "I've come from Virginia to teach here. I want to tell you 3 things on the first day so we understand each other." Silence. "The first thing is, I expect you to work hard. Not because hard work is a punishment, but because it is the only reliable path to a life you choose rather than a life that happens to you." She let that sit for a moment. "The second thing is, I will not pretend I know everything. When I don't know something, I will tell you, and we'll find the answer together." The small girl with the red braids was nodding slightly unconsciously. "The third thing is," Clara paused deliberately, "I am harder to discourage than I look." A boy of about 12 in the third row, heavyset, with the kind of expression that communicated he had been to several schools and found them all wanting, said flatly, "My pa says women shouldn't run schools." "Your pa," Clara said pleasantly, "is welcome to come speak with me about it, any time." The boy blinked. "What's your name?" Clara asked. "Thomas," he said warily. "Thomas, can you read?" "Some." "Then we have the starting point." She moved to the front of the room. "Let's begin." 3 weeks in, she began to understand the shape of the place. Carter's Landing was not a rich community. It was a working one. Farmers and tradespeople and families that had come west looking for something better than what they'd left behind, and found something harder and more real. They were proud in the way that people are proud when they have earned everything they own, and suspicious of outsiders in the way that comes from experience with people who promised things they never delivered. Clara was an outsider. She knew it. She didn't pretend otherwise. What she did was work. She kept the school open 6 days. She borrowed books from Carter's personal library. He had more than she'd expected, stacked in the study, with the careless organization of a man who reads the way he eats without thinking much about table manners. She asked Ruth Hadley to teach her to make cornbread and how to read the weather by the color of the eastern sky in the morning. She sat with families in the evenings when they asked, helped with correspondence with contract reading, with the kind of arithmetic that keeps a farm from drowning in its own debt. She learned who needed what before they asked for it. It was, she realized one Tuesday morning while helping a woman named Mary Tanner draft a letter to her sister in Ohio. The thing she had always been good at, the thing she had spent 3 years doing quietly in Virginia, managing the edges of her father's household, keeping the accounts that her father's pride wouldn't let him admit needed keeping. She had been doing this her whole life. She just hadn't been given credit for it, Carter noticed. He didn't say so directly, that was not she was learning his way, but she would find extra candles in the schoolroom without asking. A sturdier chair appeared at her desk. When she mentioned that 2 of the younger children were struggling because they came in hungry, a standing arrangement was quietly made with Ruth Hadley, and breakfast appeared at the school every morning without anyone making a ceremony of it. She noticed. She didn't say anything either. But one afternoon, coming back from the Tanner farm, she passed Carter on the road. He was on foot, which surprised her, heading back from the river with his boots muddy and his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Carter," she said. "Miss Whitmore." He fell into step beside her naturally the way he'd done on the drive at Richmond. "How's Mary Tanner?" "Better. Her sister is coming from Ohio in the spring, She needed help writing the letter. "You've been doing a lot of that," he said. "Correspondence, accounts. It's more than the school." "The school is part of the community," Clara said. "You can't separate them." He looked at her sidelong. "No," he said slowly. "Reckon you can't." A silence that was not uncomfortable. Then Carter said, "The Tanner farm is in trouble. More trouble than Mary knows. Harmon Tanner borrowed against the land 2 years ago, and the note comes due in the fall. I've been trying to figure out how to—" He stopped. "Never mind." "How much is the note?" Clara asked. "That's not your—" "How much, Mr. Carter?" he told her. She was quiet for a moment, doing the arithmetic in her head, the way her father had taught her to do it quickly without paper, without showing the work, until the answer was clean. "If the Southfield goes in corn this year, instead of tobacco," she said, "and if the Tanner land does the same, you could split the cost of the mill contract, reduce the overhead, and the margin would cover the note with enough left to clear the equipment debt by December." Carter stopped walking. She stopped too, turned to look at him. He was staring at her with an expression that was not quite surprise. It was past surprise into something more like recognition. The way you look when someone says out loud the thing you've been trying to formulate for weeks and couldn't quite reach. "I've been circling that answer for 3 months, he said. "You were starting from the wrong column," Clara said. "You were looking at the debt first. Start with the yield. The debt follows the yield." Howe was quiet. Then he said, "Miss Whitmore, would you be willing to sit with me and my foreman tomorrow morning?" "Yes," she said. "And when my foreman disagrees with you?" "I'll be polite," she said. "But I won't be wrong." For the first time since she'd arrived, William Carter laughed. Not the almost laugh from Richmond. A real one, low and full and genuine, the laugh of a man who has been handed something he didn't know he was waiting for. Clara smiled. It surprised her, not the smile, but the ease of it. The way it arrived without effort. She kept walking. He walked beside her. And for a long moment, neither of them needed to say anything at all. The letter from Nathaniel arrived on a Thursday morning 6 weeks after she'd left Virginia. Ruth brought it in with the regular post, set it at the edge of the breakfast table without comment, and went back to the stove. Clara looked at the handwriting, that precise, educated slope she had spent 3 years reading across dinner tables and garden walls, and felt something move through her chest that she didn't quite know how to name. Not love. She was past that, she thought. She was almost certain of that. Not anger either. She had used that up on the road south. Something more like recognition. Of course, he writes now. She opened it. It was 3 pages. She read them twice. Nathaniel wrote that he had been wrong. He wrote that he had realized it quickly. Too quickly, he said, for him to pretend it was wisdom and not just desperation. He wrote that the engagement to Elizabeth was proceeding, but that he could not stop thinking about the night in the ballroom, about what Clara had said, about the way she had looked at him before she turned away. He wrote, "I know I do not deserve to ask you anything, but I am asking Clara. Come home. I will find a way to manage the financial situation. I will speak to my father. You have always been the person I should have chosen." She read it a second time, then she folded it. She sat with it for the moment in the quiet of Ruth's kitchen, with the smell of cornbread in the air and the sound of the children arriving at the school across the road. She could hear Thomas arguing with someone about something, the way he argued about everything, loudly and with great conviction. She thought about what it would have meant to receive this letter 2 months ago. She thought about who she had been 2 months ago, standing in a blue dress in a Virginia ballroom, believing her entire future was contained in a man's decision about her worth. She thought about the corn yield and the drainage problem on the South Field, and Mary Tanner's face when the letter to her sister was finished. She thought about the small girl with the red braids, her name was Eliza, who had read an entire paragraph aloud last week without stopping for the first time in her life, and looked up from the page with an expression that Clara had needed to look away from, because it was too raw and too perfect to hold. She thought about Carter walking beside her on the road, laughing for the first time. Then she went to the writing desk in the corner of the kitchen, and she wrote Nathaniel Ashford a reply. It was short, 1 page. She did not labor over it. She wrote, "Nathaniel, I understand what this letter cost you, and I do not write this in cruelty. But I am not coming home. Not because I am angry with you, I am not anymore. But because I have discovered something in the past weeks that I cannot unknow. I am not someone who is waiting to be chosen. I am someone who is building. I wish you well with everything I have left to give that feeling. But that feeling is all it can be now. Do not write again. Clara. She sealed it. She walked it to the post herself. And coming back down the main road of Carter's Landing, with the Kentucky morning opening up around her, she realized that her hands were not shaking. Her chest was not tight. She felt nothing like loss. She felt, in fact, like someone who has just set down a weight they'd carried so long, they'd stopped noticing it was there. Thomas came to her after school that Friday and stood in the doorway of the empty classroom with his hands in his pockets and the particular expression of a 12-year-old boy who wants to ask something and is annoyed at himself for wanting to. "Thomas," she said without looking up from the papers she was marking. "Whatever you want to say it." "My pa came in last night," he said. "He was wrong." She looked up. Thomas was staring at the floor. "About women running schools," he said. "He said he talked to some of the other families, and he said you helped Mrs. Tanner with something about the farm, and he said—" A pause. "He said you might know more than he thought." Clara set down her pen. "What do you think?" she asked. Thomas looked up. There was something very honest in his face when he wasn't using it for bluster. "I think," he said, "that you're the best teacher I've had, and I've had 4. Clara held his gaze steadily. "Thomas," she said. "Thank you. That means more than you know." He nodded quickly, embarrassed by his own sincerity, and disappeared out the door. She listened to his boots on the road outside. Then she smiled at the empty classroom alone, and let herself feel it fully. The real trouble started on a Monday, the way real trouble always seems to. A man named Gerald Holt rode into Carter's Landing from the east. Not Margaret Holt's kin, or at least Clara hadn't determined a connection yet with 2 men behind him, and the manner of someone who knows his papers are in order and wants you to know it too. I went to Carter's house first. Clara was at the school when it happened, but Ruth told her about it that evening in the kitchen, with the particular conciseness of a woman who doesn't dramatize because she doesn't need to. "He represents the Western Land Trust," Ruth said. "Out of Philadelphia. They've been buying up land across 4 counties. They want this one." "Carter's land," Clara said. "All of it. The settlement, the farms attached to it, the river access." Ruth set a bowl in front of Clara with more force than was necessary. "They made an offer. Mr. Carter said no." "What did Holt say to that?" Ruth was quiet for a moment. "He said," Ruth told her carefully, "offers have a way of expiring, Mr. Carter. And land that's burdened with debt has a way of becoming available whether the owner intends it to or not." Clara stared at her. "How much debt does Carter carry?" she asked. Ruth looked at her in a way that said she was asking the right question and about to get an answer she wouldn't like. "Enough," Ruth said. "He expanded the settlement 3 years ago. Built the mill, the schoolhouse, the road to the river. All of it borrowed against the land." "How much time does he have?" "The notes come due in 18 months. Clara set down her spoon. 18 months. She did the arithmetic again, the way her father had taught her. Quickly, without paper. 18 months. Southfield yield. Tanner Farm Partnership. Mill contract. River access fees. She needed more information. She needed to see the full account books. She needed... The door opened and Carter came in. He looked at Ruth. Ruth looked at him. The particular silence of 2 people who have already had this conversation once today, and are both pretending they haven't. "You told her," he said. "She asked," Ruth said simply. Carter sat down across the table from Clara. He looked tired, not the physical tired of a man who has worked a long day, but the older tired of a man who has been carrying something alone for a long time. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "I want to be clear that this situation doesn't affect your position here. The school." "Mr. Carter," she said, "the school will continue regardless of—" "William," she said. He stopped. She had used his first name. She hadn't planned to. It had come out with the directness of someone who needs to be heard and knows that formality is getting in the way. He looked at her. "Show me the books," she said. "Clara, you hired me because you trusted my judgment," she said. "You sat with me and your foreman for 3 hours last week, and you changed the Southfield plan because I was right about the yield. You know I was right. So trust me now and show me the books." Something moved through his expression. Not surrender. Carter was not a man who surrendered, but something like the decision to stop fighting a current when you're a better swimmer than you think. He got up, went to the study, came back with a ledger that was thick and well kept, and opened with the authority of someone who has always been honest, at least with himself, about where things stood. He set it in front of her. "The bottom number," he said, "on the last page." She turned to it. She looked at it. Her face gave nothing away. Not because she was performing calm, because she had learned somewhere in the last 6 weeks that panic is only useful if you don't have anything better to do with the energy. "All right," she said. "All right," he repeated, like it wasn't enough of a response. "I need 2 days," Clara said. "I need to go through this fully, and I need to speak with the Tanners and the Flemings and whoever manages the mill contract. And then I'll tell you what I think. And if what you think isn't enough..." Clara looked at him across the ledger. "Then we'll think of something else," she said. Carter studied her for a long moment. "You're not afraid of this," he said. It wasn't accusatory, it was almost wondering. "I'm afraid of plenty of things," Clara said. "But not of a problem with numbers. Numbers don't lie, and they don't change their minds, and they don't stand up in a ballroom and announce they've chosen someone else." She met his eyes. "I can work with numbers." The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. Warmer somehow, and more honest. "All right, Miss Whitmore," Carter said quietly. "Clara," she said. A pause. "Clara," he said. It was the first time he had said her name. Her actual name, not Miss Whitmore, not the careful distance of a formal arrangement. And something about the way it sat in the air between them felt significant in a way she wasn't ready to examine. She pulled the ledger closer, and she got to work. She worked through the night. Ruth left a lamp burning and went to bed without comment. Carter stayed for the first 2 hours sitting across from her answering questions, when she asked them quiet when she didn't, and then he went to the doorway of the study and stopped. "Do you need anything?" he asked. "No," she said without looking up. "You should sleep." "I'll sleep when I've found it." "Found what?" She looked up then. "The number that fixes this," she said. "It's in here somewhere. I just haven't reached it yet." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said something she wasn't expecting. "I don't know many people," he said, "who walk into someone else's problem and look for the way out instead of the way clear." She didn't understand him for a moment. "Most people," he said, "when they hear there's a problem, they look for the exit. You sat down and started reading." Clara looked at him. "Where else would I look?" she said. He nodded once, like she'd confirmed something. "Good night, Clara," he said. "Good night, William," she said. He went. She turned back to the ledger. And somewhere in the small hours of that warm Kentucky night, with a lamp burning low and the sound of the river just barely audible through the open window, Clara Whitmore found the number she was looking for and sat very still for one breath, and then two, feeling something build in her chest that was larger than relief and quieter than triumph and entirely completely hers. She had been useful before. She had been useful to her father, useful to Nathaniel's idea of her, useful in the careful, decorative way that women of her station were supposed to be useful. But this was different. This was hers. Built by her hands from the inside of her own mind, in a room where no one had told her what to find or how to find it. She picked up her pen. She began to write. She presented her findings the next morning at the kitchen table with Carter and his foreman, a square-shouldered man named Dale Pruitt, who had the hands of someone who'd worked land his entire life, and the expression of someone who trusted numbers only slightly more than he trusted strangers. Clara had been awake since 4. She didn't look like it. She had made that decision deliberately. She had washed her face, pinned her hair and sat down at that table, like a woman who had slept 8 hours and eaten a full breakfast, because she understood something her father had never quite learned. How you carry yourself in the moment before you speak determines whether people listen to what you actually say. She opened the ledger to the pages she had marked. "The debt is real," she said without preamble. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But the debt is not the problem. The problem is that you've been servicing it from the wrong accounts." Pruitt crossed his arms. "We service it from what we have." "You service it from the mill revenue," Clara said, "which fluctuates with the season, which means in a dry year, you're short, and in a good year, you overpay, and neither situation improves your position." She turned the ledger toward him. "If you redirect 30% of the Southfield yield income into a dedicated note account, separate, untouched, and renegotiate the mill contract from a seasonal rate to an annual flat fee. You stabilize the payment structure and eliminate the shortfall risk in the fourth quarter." Pruitt looked at the page, looked at Carter. "That's not how we've done it," Pruitt said. "I know," Clara said. "That's why Gerald Holt is in Henderson County making offers." The room went quiet. Carter had not taken his eyes off her since she started speaking. Not the way men sometimes watched women assessing waiting for a mistake, but the way a person watches something they are trying to fully understand. "There's more," Clara said. "Tell me," Carter said. "The Tanner partnership I mentioned last week, I've already spoken informally with Mary Tanner. If Harmon agrees, a shared mill contract between your land and theirs reduces the per bushel cost by almost a third. The river access fees that the trust is using as leverage against you. They're based on an old survey. The survey is wrong. I checked the boundary records last night against the map in your study. Your river frontage is 40 yards longer than the trust's documentation claims, which means their leverage on the access fees is built on a number that isn't accurate." Pruitt uncrossed his arms. Carter leaned forward slowly. "You found that last night," he said. "I found it at 2 in the morning, Clara said. "I would have found it sooner if the filing system in your study were organized by year instead of by subject." Pruitt made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Carter looked at her for a long moment, and then he said quietly, "What does this buy us?" "Time," Clara said. 8 months minimum before the trust can make a legitimate legal claim on anything. Likely more once a proper surveyor confirms the boundary. 8 months is enough to restructure the payment accounts, formalize the Tanner partnership, and get the Southfield into production on the new plan. "And Holt," Carter said. "Holt is a buyer," Clara said. "He's not a fool. If you approach him not as someone defending, but as someone presenting terms, you change the dynamic. You're not the man trying to hold on to his land. You're the man who controls the river access he needs for his eastern expansion." Pruitt said slowly, "She's saying we have something he wants more than he's let on." "That's exactly what I'm saying," Clara said. Carter sat back in his chair. The kitchen was very still. Then Pruitt said, "Mr. Carter, I've been managing this land for 11 years. He paused. "She's right about the survey. I've thought something was wrong with those numbers for 2 years and never chased it down." He looked at Clara with the frank respect of a man who has no patience for pretense, and therefore none for false modesty either. "Ma'am, I apologize for last week." "Last week," Clara said. "In the field meeting. I was short with you. You were skeptical," Clara said. "That's different. Skepticism I can work with." Pruitt nodded once firmly, like a deal had been made. Carter was still watching her. "Clara," he said, "how long will it take you to put this in writing? Formal enough to take to the county office." "I already did," she said. She slid 3 pages across the table, neat and clean, and written in the small hours of the morning by a woman who had stopped waiting for permission to be useful and started simply being it. "I assumed you'd want to move quickly." Carter picked up the pages. He read them. He read them a second time. Then he set them down and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before, open, almost vulnerable, like something had been removed that he'd been wearing so long he'd forgotten it was there. "Thank you," he said, simply, like the words were the full size of what he meant. Clara met his eyes. "Don't thank me yet," she said. "Holt comes back Friday." Friday came the way trouble always does on a bright morning when everything else looks fine. Gerald Holt rode in at 10 o'clock with his 2 men behind him, and a third she hadn't seen before, a younger man with an attorney's case under his arm, which told Clara immediately that the polite phase of this conversation was over. She was at the school when Ruth sent Thomas running to get her. Thomas arrived at a dead sprint, which told her something too. "Holt's back," Thomas said, breathing hard. "He's got a lawyer." "I know," Clara said, already untying her apron. "What are you going to do?" "Walk over there," she said. Calmly. She straightened her sleeves. "Thomas, keep the children at their reading. Don't let them come outside." "Yes, ma'am." He hesitated. "You're not scared?" Clara looked at him. "Of course I am," she said. "But being scared and being stopped are two entirely different things." She walked across the road. Holt was on Carter's porch when she arrived, standing with the ease of a man who believes the ground he's standing on already belongs to him. He was mid-40s, well-dressed with the kind of smile that has been professionally calibrated to communicate both friendliness and immovability. Carter stood in the doorway, Pruitt just behind him. Holt saw Clara approaching, and the smile shifted, became curious, then recalculating. "Mr. Carter," Clara said, stepping up onto the porch without slowing. "I apologize for the delay. Shall we go inside?" Holt looked at Carter. "And this is Miss Whitmore," Carter said. "She manages the settlement accounts." Holt studied her. "I see." He said it in the tone men use when they mean "I see," and I have already decided how much weight to give this. Clara smiled pleasantly. "Mr. Holt, I understand your organization has an interest in the river access attached to this land." "We have an interest in the land itself," Holt said. "Yes," Clara said. "I've reviewed your documentation. May I ask which survey are you working from?" A small hesitation. "The county survey, filed in 1809. "Interesting," Clara said. "Because the boundary markers on the 1809 survey don't correspond to the original land grant documentation, which was filed in 1804. There's a 40-yard discrepancy on the eastern boundary." She paused. "Specifically the 40 yards that includes the primary river access point your eastern expansion requires." The attorney opened his case, started shuffling papers. Holt's smile had not moved, but something behind it had. "Miss Whitmore," he said carefully, "those are significant claims." "They're accurate claims," Clara said. "I can show you the documentation if you'd like. We had a surveyor in on Wednesday." She had in fact written urgently to a surveyor in Louisville, who was a contact of the Whitmore family's old attorney, and he had ridden through in 36 hours on the promise of double his usual fee, which Clara had negotiated from Carter's contingency fund, without telling Carter until after it was done. His report confirms the discrepancy, which means the access fees you've been calculating your offer around are based on land that legally Mr. Carter already fully controls. The attorney had gone very still. Holt looked at Carter. "Did you know about this discrepancy?" "I suspected it," Carter said, which was not entirely true, but was true enough. Holt turned back to Clara. The professional smile was still there, barely. "This changes the conversation somewhat," he said. "Yes," Clara agreed. "It does. Because now you're not in a position to pressure Mr. Carter using access rights he already holds, which means the conversation isn't about whether he sells. It's about whether he has any interest in a partnership arrangement that gives your organization eastern expansion capability without requiring a full land transfer." Silence. Even Pruitt had gone quiet behind her. Holt said, "A partnership arrangement. River access rights formally licensed at a rate to be negotiated. Annual fee renewable with a right of first negotiation clause, if Mr. Carter ever does choose to sell any portion of the eastern boundary." Clara let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. "Your organization gets what it actually needs for the eastern expansion. Mr. Carter retains his land. Everyone leaves this porch having gotten something." Holt looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his attorney. The attorney gave the smallest possible nod. Holt said, "I'd need to see the surveyor's report." "Of course," Clara said. "Ruth, would you bring the file from the study, please?" Ruth, who had been standing just inside the door the whole time, brought the file immediately with the competent satisfaction of a woman who had prepared for exactly this moment. Clara stood perfectly still on the porch and did not let herself look at Carter, because if she looked at Carter right now, she was fairly certain she would lose the composure she'd been maintaining through sheer stubbornness for the past 8 minutes. Finally, Holt said, "I'll need 2 weeks to consult with the trust." "Of course," Clara said. "We'll expect to hear from you by the 30th. Holt looked at her one more time. Something in his expression had shifted past recalculation into something that was, if not quite respect, at least the precursor to it. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Are you an attorney?" "No," she said. "I'm a school teacher." He almost smiled. A real one this time. He tipped his hat, went down the steps. His men followed. The sound of hooves on the road faded, and the moment they were out of sight, Clara let out the breath she had been holding for the better part of 20 minutes and put one hand flat on the porch rail to steady herself. Carter was beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment, just stood there. Then, the surveyor. "Yes," she said. "You commissioned him without telling me." "I told you afterward." "You told me this morning at breakfast very casually between the cornbread and the coffee. I didn't want you to worry about the fee while you were preparing to meet Holt." A pause. "Clara," Carter said, "I'll pay for it myself if—" "I'm not talking about the fee," he said, and his voice was different now, lower, more careful, like a man navigating terrain he isn't sure of. "I'm talking about the fact that you walked into a situation that was mine to carry, and you just carried it." "Someone needed to," she said. "That's not—" He stopped, started again. "Most people would have stayed at the school." "Most people," Clara said, "didn't read that ledger." Carter looked at her. The moment held. And then from across the road, Thomas's voice carried through the air with the absolute untimeliness that only a 12-year-old boy can achieve. "Miss Whitmore Eliza says she finished the reading assignment and wants to know what's next." Clara looked across at the school, looked back at Carter. "I have to get back," she said. "I know," he said. She stepped off the porch. "William," she said, turning. "Yeah." "You're going to be all right," she said. "The land, the settlement, all of it. You're going to be all right." He looked at her with something that was not quite relief, and not quite gratitude, and not quite something else. Something that had no clean name yet. "I know," he said. "I think I do know that." She nodded once, and went back to her children. The second letter from Nathaniel arrived on a Wednesday, 10 days after she'd told him not to write again. She recognized the handwriting before Ruth even set it on the table, and she felt something cold move through her chest. Not fear exactly. Something more like the feeling of a door you thought you'd shut, finding itself open again. She did not open it immediately. She taught the morning class. She helped Thomas with long division, which he approached like a personal enemy. She listened to Eliza read 3 paragraphs aloud, with the focused intensity of a child who has understood that reading is power, and intends to collect as much of it as possible. She waited until the schoolroom was empty. Then she sat at her desk and opened the letter. It was longer this time. 6 pages. She recognized the signs Nathaniel wrote longer when he was desperate, when the words had been building, and he'd released them all at once without editing. She had loved that about him once. Now it read differently. He wrote that Elizabeth's father had begun making demands about the Ashford landholdings. He wrote that his own father was ill seriously, the kind of ill that couldn't be prettied up, and that the estate was in early discussions about restructuring. He wrote that he needed Clara. Not wanted, needed. He wrote that word 4 times across 6 pages. "I need you. I have always needed you. I was a fool not to see it when I had you." And then on the last page a line that made her go very still. "I am coming to Kentucky, Clara. Not to pressure you. Only to see you. To apologize in person the way I should have done months ago. I will be in Henderson County by the end of September." She read it twice. Then she folded very carefully, stood up, walked out of the schoolroom, crossed the road, walked up onto Carter's porch, knocked once, and went inside without waiting. Carter was at his desk. He looked up. "I need to tell you something," she said. He set down his pen. She told him. She handed him the letter without editorializing. Let him read it himself, watched his face while he did. Carter's face was not easy to read at the best of times. He didn't leak emotion the way some people did, but she knew him well enough now to see the small shifts. The slight tightening at the jaw. The stillness that meant he was thinking faster than he was showing. He set the letter on the desk. "He's coming here," Carter said. "Yes." "Do you want him to?" "No," she said without hesitation. Carter was quiet. "I'm not asking you to handle it," Clara said quickly. "I'm telling you because you should know, because it's your land, and it affects your settlement, and I don't keep information from people who trust me." "That's not why you're telling me," Carter said. She stopped. He wasn't looking at her accusingly. He was looking at her the way he always looked at things, straight, without flinching away from what he actually saw. "No," she admitted. "It's not only why." "Why else?" he asked, and his voice was very quiet and very careful, and nothing about it was casual. Clara looked at him across the desk. "Because you're the person I wanted to tell," she said. "Because when something happens now, good or bad, you're the person I think of first. And I thought you should know that too." The room was very quiet. Outside, a horse moved in the paddock. Somewhere far off, a crow called twice. Carter stood up from the desk. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the small scar above his left brow. She'd never asked about close enough that she was very aware of her own breathing. "Clara," he said. "Don't say something careful," she said. "Please. I have had enough careful conversations." Something moved through his expression. Relief, almost like she'd unlocked something he'd been holding closed. "I wasn't going to," he said, and then he took her hand. Both of his around one of hers. Careful and warm and completely without pretense. "He can come," Carter said. "He can come and say whatever he needs to say. And then he'll go. And you'll still be here." Clara looked at their hands. "You sound very certain," she said. "I am certain," Carter said. "Because I've watched you for 3 months. Choose this place, these people, this life every single day, without anyone asking you to. And I don't think Nathaniel Ashford has anything to offer that changes that." She was quiet for a moment. "What if he's changed?" she said. Not because she believed it, but because she needed to say it out loud to someone who would answer honestly. "Has he?" Carter asked. She thought about the 6 pages. The word need repeated 4 times. "No," she said. "He hasn't." Carter nodded. He didn't let go of her hand. "Then we'll be ready," he said. September came in hot and slow, and then on the 27th, Nathaniel Ashford rode into Carter's landing. Clara knew he was coming before she saw him. Thomas came running again, reliable as a bell, and she was already removing her apron and smoothing her hair when he burst through the school door. "Man from Virginia," Thomas said. "Fancy coat. 1 carriage behind him." "Thank you, Thomas," she said. "You want me to stay?" She looked at him. 12 years old, and already understanding that some people need someone in their corner. "Mind the school," she said. "I'll be back in an hour." She walked out. Nathaniel was tying his horse at the post in front of Carter's house. He looked up when he heard her footsteps, and the expression that crossed his face was complicated relief, and something else, something that looked almost like surprise, like he had constructed a version of her in his imagination, and found the real one different. She was different. She knew it. She could feel it in the way she was standing. "Clara," he said. "Nathaniel," she said. "You should have listened to my letter." "I know." He came toward her. "I know I should have. But I—" He stopped, looked around at Carter's landing, the road, the school, the mill, the people moving with their normal Thursday morning purpose. "This is where you've been." "This is where I live," she said. Something moved through his expression at that, the word, live, not stay, not work. He heard the distinction. "You look well," he said. "I am well. Clara." He stopped 2 steps from her, close enough that she could see the lines in his face. He looked tired, she thought. the kind of tired that came from inside. I made the worst decision of my life in that ballroom. I have known it since the night it happened. I let the money I chose wrong, and I have not stopped knowing it. She looked at him. For a moment, she let herself feel it, the 3 years, the blue dress, the ring on the silver tray. Let herself acknowledge that this man had been in another version of her life, the center of everything she was building toward. "I believe you," she said. His face opened with hope. "But Nathaniel," she said, "do you understand what you're actually saying? You're not sorry you hurt me. You're sorry because Elizabeth's father is making demands, and your father is ill, and you need what I could give you. You need the Clara who managed things quietly and loved you without conditions. You need useful." "That's not—" "You said need," Clara said. "In your letter, 4 times. I need you. Not once did you write I love you. Not once did you write you deserve better. You wrote I need you, which tells me exactly what I am to you even now." Nathaniel was silent. Clara watched him, and she saw it happen the moment the defense collapsed, and the thing underneath it was just there, plain and unguarded. He was not a villain. She had never thought he was. He was something more familiar and more heartbreaking than that, a man who had been given a choice between what he wanted and what was safe and chosen safety, and was now standing in the consequences of it. "You're right," he said. His voice was very quiet. "You're right. I'm sorry, Clara." "I know," she said. "Is there—" He stopped. "Is there anything I can do?" She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said something she hadn't planned to say, something that arrived with the strange, clean clarity of a truth that's been waiting. "Yes," she said. "You can go home. You can treat Elizabeth Pemberton like a person and not a financial instrument. And you can stop writing to me." She paused. "That's how you make it right, Nathaniel. Not by coming back to me. By becoming someone who doesn't repeat the same mistake." He looked at her. His eyes were wet. She had not seen him cry in 3 years. She felt compassion for him. Actual, uncomplicated compassion, not love, not anger. Just the feeling you have for someone who is suffering from their own choices, and finally understanding the weight of them. "Take care of yourself," she said. "I mean it." She turned. She walked back toward the school. She did not run. She did not look back. She did not let herself feel triumphant, because this wasn't triumph. It was just the closing of a door that should have been closed long ago. She was 10 feet from the school when she heard boots behind her. Not Nathaniel's. These were heavier, more familiar, and then Carter was beside her, falling into step the way he always did, natural as breathing. "How long were you watching?" she said. "Long enough," he said. "You could have come out. You didn't need me to." She walked for a moment. "No," she said. "I didn't." "I know." A pause. "You all right?" She considered the question honestly. "Yes," she said. "Actually, yes." They reached the school door. Inside, she could hear Thomas explaining something to the class in the overly confident tone of a boy who has been left in charge for exactly 1 minute too long. Carter stopped beside her at the door. "Clara," he said. "I know," she said before he could continue. He was quiet for a moment. "What do you know?" he asked. She looked at him directly, without the careful sideways quality of the past 3 months, without the professional distance of school teacher and landowner. Just her and him in the Kentucky morning, with the sound of children inside, and a man from Virginia riding away on the road behind them. "I know what you were going to say," she said. "And I know that I would have said yes." Carter looked at her. And for the first time since she'd known him, William Carter had nothing to say. His hand found hers at her side. He didn't hold it dramatically, just placed his hand over hers the way he'd given her the coat in the Richmond dark, without performance, without asking for anything in return. Just warmth. Just presence. Clara closed her fingers around his. "I have to go back in," she said. "Thomas is lying to the younger children about something. I can hear it in his voice." "Yeah," Carter said. The almost laugh in his voice that she had come to understand was the realest thing about him. "You probably should." She opened the door. She was 1 step inside when he said quietly behind her, "Clara." She turned. He was standing in the September light with his hat in one hand, looking at her with the expression she had first seen on a dark Virginia road, the one that looked at her and saw not what she'd lost, but what she was. "I'm glad you brought back the coat," he said. She smiled, a real one, the kind that didn't need to hide anything. "So am I," she said, and she went inside, back to her children, back to her work, back to the life she had built from the inside out, and somewhere behind her on a Kentucky road. Nathaniel Ashford's carriage rolled east back toward Virginia, back toward the consequences of choices made in ballrooms, and the distance between where Clara Whitmore had been and where she was now felt in that moment like the exact length of a life finally begun. The week after Nathaniel left, Clara slept better than she had in months. She didn't analyze it. She just noticed it waking each morning with a clarity that felt unfamiliar at first, like a room with the windows finally opened. The weight she hadn't fully known she was carrying had lifted, and what remained underneath it was not emptiness, but space. Room to move, room to think forward instead of backward. Carter's Landing moved forward with her. Holt's organization sent word on the 30th as Clara had specified. The letter was formal and precise, and said in the careful language of men who are accustomed to winning and are adjusting to not winning, that the Western Land Trust was prepared to discuss a licensing arrangement for river access rights. They proposed a meeting in Louisville in the second week of October. Carter read the letter at breakfast and slid it across the table to Clara without a word. She read it, slid it back. "They're sending their Eastern director," she said. "Not Holt." "I noticed that," Carter said. "It means they took the boundary survey seriously. Holt doesn't have authority to negotiate a new structure. They had to go above him. Which means we have more leverage than we thought. Which means," Clara said, "that you should go to Louisville prepared to walk away." Carter looked at her over his coffee. "And if they don't move, they'll move," she said. "They need that river access more than they've admitted. If they didn't, they wouldn't be sending the Eastern director." Pruitt, who had been listening from the doorway with his arms crossed, and his expression of a man who had spent 11 years being the smartest person in the room and had recently revised that ranking, said, "She's right." Carter looked at Pruitt, looked back at Clara. "You're coming to Louisville," he said. It wasn't a question. "I assumed so," Clara said. "Someone needs to keep you from being too agreeable." "I'm not agreeable," Carter said. "You're polite," she said. "In negotiations, that reads the same." Pruitt made the sound that had become over 3 months his version of a laugh. But 3 days before Louisville, everything changed. It came from Virginia. Not Nathaniel this time a letter from Eustace Pratt, her father's attorney, written in the dry, careful hand of a man delivering information he wishes he didn't have to. Her father had fallen, not a figure of speech. Literally fallen down the back steps of the Whitmore house on a wet morning in early October, and the damage was significant. Hip, possibly worse. He was bedridden. The household was being managed by a neighbor woman, a Mrs. Carlyle, who was kind but had her own family and couldn't stay indefinitely. There was a second paragraph that Pratt had written, and then she could see almost crossed out before deciding she needed to know it. The remaining Whitmore assets, the house, the last parcel of land, were in active proceedings. A creditor had filed. The timeline for resolution was 60 days, possibly less. Clara read the letter twice. Then she set it on the table and sat very still for a moment, in the way that she'd learned to sit when something large arrived and she needed to let it fully land before she decided what to do with it. Her father was alone and hurt in a house that was being taken from him. She was 6 days' travel away. She had a meeting in Louisville in 3 days that could determine the future of Carter's Landing and everyone in it. She thought about the cornbread smell in Ruth's kitchen. She thought about Eliza reading her first full paragraph. She thought about Carter's hand over hers in the September light. Then she thought about her father's hands on his cane, trembling, asking, "What are we going to do then?" She folded the letter. She found Carter in the study, she told him. She watched his face while she did that steady, honest face that gave her what she needed now, which was not comfort and not solutions, but simply the respect of being looked at directly while she carried something heavy. "You need to go," he said. The Louisville meeting. Pruitt can come with me. We know what we're asking for. Carter. Your father is hurt, he said, simply, without drama. You need to go. She looked at him. If I leave, she said, the school. Thomas is 13 in December, Carter said. He knows the curriculum better than half the children, and you know it. He can manage the younger ones for 2 weeks. You've been thinking about this. I started thinking about it when I saw your face come through the door, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know how long I'll need to be there, she said. I know. The house may be lost. He may need Clara. His voice was very quiet. Go take care of your father. Everything here will be here when you come back. She looked at him and felt something move through her that she couldn't quite speak. Gratitude, yes, but more than that. The particular feeling of being known by someone. Of having someone look at your situation and understand without your having to explain the calculus of it exactly what it costs you. I'll be back before the first snow, she said. I know that too, he said. She left the next morning. Virginia looked smaller than she remembered. She couldn't explain it rationally. The roads were the same, the red clay, the smell of late tobacco, the sky that particular shade of autumn blue that she had grown up calling home. But something in the scale of it had changed, or perhaps something in her had, and the result was the same. It looked like a place she had once lived, rather than a place she lived. Her father was in the back bedroom, propped on pillows, looking older than 6 months should have made him, and more relieved to see her than he knew how to say. Clara, he said, and the word came out with the particular fragility of a man who has been trying not to need anything and failing at it. I'm here, Papa, she said. She sat beside him and took his hand and did not cry, because if she cried, he would spend energy comforting her that he needed for himself. The house, he started. I know, she said. We'll talk about it when you're stronger. There's not much time. Papa. She squeezed his hand. One thing at a time. He looked at her for a long moment, and then he said with a different quality in his voice, something almost wondering, You're different. Yes, she said. What happened to you out there? She thought about how to answer that. I stopped waiting for someone to tell me what I was worth, she said. And I found out for myself. Her father was quiet. Then, with the honesty of a man who has had months of pain and forced stillness to think about the things he'd rather not. I should have taught you that. When you were young. Instead of... He stopped. Instead of teaching you that the right marriage was the answer to everything. You taught me what you knew, Clara said. And what you knew came from love. That's enough, Papa. His eyes were wet. He looked away. Is it a good place? He asked. Kentucky. It's a very good place, she said. And the man who wrote the letter? She was quiet for a moment. He's a good man, she said. Her father nodded slowly, pressed her hand. Then you went in the right direction, he said. She spent 2 days at her father's bedside before she allowed herself to turn her attention to the house. What she found was not as bad as Pratt's letter had made it sound, which was not to say it was good. The debt was real. The creditor was real. But the creditor, a merchant named Aldous Finch, who had extended credit to her father's tobacco operations 4 years ago, was not, when Clara finally sat across from him in his counting house, the implacable force she'd expected. He was 60 years old, and tired, and wanted his money more than he wanted a house. Miss Whitmore, he said when she laid out her proposal. You're asking me to extend the settlement period by 45 days. I'm asking you to accept a partial immediate payment and extend the remainder, Clara said. The immediate payment demonstrates good faith. The 45 days gives me time to arrange the full balance from assets currently in negotiation. The assets in negotiation were her share of the Louisville agreement. Carter had told her before she left that if the river access licensing came through as expected, she was to consider a third of the first year's fee as hers, which she had argued about, and he had refused to argue back, simply saying, You built it, Clara, in a tone that did not invite further discussion. Finch looked at her proposal. Where is the immediate payment coming from? He asked. From me, she said. She had money. Not much what she'd saved from 6 months of Carter's wages, which were modest but honest, and which she had spent almost nothing of because she had not needed to spend anything. She had been living inside someone else's generosity and working as though it were her own, and the result was a small sum that was now in this moment exactly enough to matter. Finch read her letter of proposed terms. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your father borrowed from me because he trusted me not to ruin him." "I know," Clara said. "I don't want to ruin him." "I know that too," she said. He signed the extension. She walked out into the Virginia afternoon with the paper in her hands and felt something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, not even relief. Just a kind of sorrow for her father's pride, for the years he'd spent trying to keep a shape that was already changing, for all the things that could have been different if someone had sat down with the numbers earlier. She had been that person. She could have been that person years ago if anyone had thought to ask her. She folded the paper. She went back to her father. The letter from Carter arrived on a Thursday, 8 days after she'd left Kentucky. It was not long. Carter was not. She had learned a man who wrote long letters. What he wrote was exact. "Louisville went well. Better than expected. Pruitt sends his regards and says, quote, 'Tell her she was right about the Eastern director. The agreement is signed. Access rights annual fee, renewable right of first refusal clause, all of it. Holt's organization agreed to every term. Pruitt says I should tell you we walked away twice before they came to us. I say, that was your strategy working. The settlement is stable. Come back when you're ready. The school is fine. Thomas has been running it with considerable authority. He told Eliza yesterday that she reads better than most adults. She told him that was obvious. W. Carter. Clara read it 3 times. She laughed on the third reading, a real laugh, quiet and private in her father's sitting room, and then she pressed the letter flat on the table and sat with it for a moment. Come back when you're ready. Not come back soon. Not we need you. Not a demand or a pressure or a subtle reminder that she was expected somewhere. Just come back when you're ready. She read it one more time. Then she went and told her father she'd need another week. The twist came from a direction she hadn't anticipated. It always does. It was Margaret Holt, not Gerald Holt, but Margaret Holt of Richmond, whom Clara had not thought about since the night of Nathaniel's engagement party, who appeared at the Whitmore house on a Friday morning, unannounced, dressed in traveling clothes, with the expression of a woman who has rehearsed something and is determined to say it before her nerve fails. Clara answered the door herself. They looked at each other for a moment. I heard you were in Virginia, Margaret said. Word travels, Clara said. May I come in? Clara stepped back. Margaret came in, sat down, did not remove her gloves, which told Clara this was not a social call she intended to extend. I want to tell you something, Margaret said. I debated whether to come. I decided I would rather say it and have you turn me out than not say it and carry it. Say it then, Clara said. Margaret's hands pressed together in her lap. The night of Nathaniel's party, she said. When I told you about the Pembertons, about Elizabeth's holdings, I already knew. I had known for 2 weeks. Nathaniel had told me. He asked me not to tell you. Clara was very still. He asked you to keep it from me, she said. He said he was going to tell you himself. After the announcement, he said it would be easier. Margaret's voice tightened. He said it would be easier to manage your reaction in private. The room was very quiet. Clara thought about standing in the ballroom in the blue dress, not knowing, thinking the night was going to be one thing, while the people around her already knew it was another. She thought about Margaret appearing at her elbow with the precise timing of someone who had built up guilt into something that looked like concern. Why are you telling me this now? Clara asked. Margaret looked at her. Because I've been watching what you've done, she said. Everyone has. Pratt told Finch. Finch told his wife is my second cousin. The whole county knows you came back, sat across from Aldous Finch, and arranged your father's debt settlement in one afternoon. She paused. And I've been sitting with what I did for 6 months. And I decided... Her voice wavered slightly, and she controlled it. I decided I would rather apologize to a woman who doesn't need it than stay silent because it's comfortable. Clara looked at her for a long moment. She thought about what this would have meant 8 months ago, the betrayal of it, the sting, the way it would have layered onto everything else and made the wound deeper. She noticed that it didn't feel like that now. It felt like information. Painful information. But information she could set down and walk away from because the woman who had needed to understand what happened in that ballroom had already understood. It had already built something new from the rubble of it, and did not need Margaret Holt's confession to complete the picture. "Margaret," she said, "I appreciate you coming. That took something." Margaret looked at her cautiously. "I'm not going to tell you it was all right," Clara said. "It wasn't. But I will tell you that what you did or didn't do is not the reason my life is what it is now. I made choices. You made choices. Nathaniel made choices. And all of them, including the ones that hurt me, led me somewhere I wouldn't trade for the version of the future I thought I wanted." She paused. "So, yes, I accept the apology." Margaret exhaled. Something in her posture changed, like a string that had been holding her upright, finally released. "You're very different," she said. "So I've been told," Clara said. "Is Kentucky?" Margaret hesitated. "Is it really what they're saying, that you've built a school, managed a land settlement, kept a whole community from being bought out by a Philadelphia trust?" Clara looked at her. "I helped," she said simply. "That's what I did. I helped, and the people there let me, and it turned out that helping was something I was very good at." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "I've been engaged," she said, "to Edward Hartwell. He's 30 years older than me and very wealthy, and my mother is very pleased." Clara heard what wasn't being said. "Are you?" she asked. Margaret looked at her gloves. "I thought I would be," she said. Clara was quiet. "Margaret," she said carefully, "what do you want? Not what's expected, not what's arranged. What do you actually want?" Margaret looked up, and the expression on her face was the kind that comes from being asked a question that should be simple and discovering to your shock that you don't know the answer. "I don't know," Margaret admitted, very quietly. "Then you need to find out," Clara said, "before October is over." Margaret nodded slowly. She stood, straightened her gloves. At the door she stopped and turned back. "Clara," she said, "for what it's worth, I always thought you were the strongest person at any table. I just didn't say it." "You're saying it now," Clara said. Margaret left. Clara sat with the silence for a moment. Then she got up and went to check on her father, and the world kept moving. The day before, she was set to leave for Kentucky. Something happened that rearranged everything she thought she understood about the next chapter of her life. Her father called her into the bedroom that evening, while the light was going golden and thin through the curtains. He was sitting up straighter than he had been. His color was better. The neighbor, Mrs. Carlyle, had been managing his meals with more success than expected, and he had a box on the bed beside him that Clara recognized immediately. Her mother's box. The cedar one, painted blue, that lived at the top of the wardrobe and which she had not seen opened since her mother's death 7 years ago. "Papa," she said. "Sit down," he said. She sat. He opened the box. Inside, nested in faded silk, was a small stack of papers, and beneath them, something Clara had never seen before, a folded legal document, old, the ink brown with age. "Your grandfather," her father said, "left something in trust. For you. Not for me, not for the Whitmore household, for you specifically. For when you married, or when you turned 25, whichever came first." He picked up the document. "You turned 25 in August." Clara stared at him. "I've been meaning to tell you," her father said. "I tried to tell you in the spring, before Nathaniel." He stopped. "And then everything happened, and I thought I didn't want you to think it would change what I didn't want to complicate." "Papa." Her voice was very level. "What is it?" He handed her the document. She unfolded it. She read it. She read it a second time, more slowly. The Whitmore Trust. Her grandfather's trust, set aside before she was born by a man who had understood that daughters needed independent foundations, held 40 acres of land in Henrico County outright. Not mortgaged. Not borrowed against. held in her grandfather's name transferred to her name upon the terms described, and therefore untouchable by her father's creditors, because it had never legally been her father's to pledge. 40 acres. In her name. Hers. She set the document down on her knee. Her father was watching her. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. Her voice was still level, but there was something underneath it. Not anger, not yet something more like the particular shock of understanding that the ground you thought had completely given way had in fact held a corner. "I thought." Her father's hands moved on the coverlet. "I thought if you knew you had something of your own, you might not try so hard to secure a marriage. And I wanted Clara. I wanted your future to be stable. I thought Nathaniel was that stability." "You thought a husband was safer than land," she said. "I was wrong," he said immediately. Simply. "I know I was wrong." She looked at the document. 40 acres in Henrico County. Her grandfather's hand. Her name in his writing, and then the legal transfer notation in the attorney's hand, and then her own name again at the top, which was her name, Clara Ann Whitmore, and had always been hers. "Is it still?" she started. "It's still there," her father said. "I couldn't touch it. It wasn't mine. Finch couldn't touch it either. His debt was against my holdings, not yours." He looked at her with something that was beyond apology and hadn't found its words yet. "It's yours, Clara. It has always been yours." She sat with this for a moment. 40 acres. Not a fortune. Not a solution to everything. But something. A foundation. Solid ground beneath her feet that had been there all along, hidden from her by someone who had loved her imperfectly and meant well and caused harm. Anyway, the oldest, most human combination there was. "What do I do with it?" she said. Not a question for him. A question for herself said aloud. Her father understood the difference and did not answer. She looked out the window. She thought about Carter's Landing, the school, Ruth Hadley's kitchen, the river frontage that was 40 yards longer than anyone had claimed, the Tanner farm, and Thomas arguing with everything, and Eliza reading her first paragraph, and Carter handing her a coat in the dark without asking for anything. She thought about build with what's left, and she thought 40 acres in Virginia is not nothing. 40 acres in Virginia, managed well, is income. Income is independence. Independence is the ability to choose where you are because you want to be there, not because you need to be. She thought about what it would feel like to choose Carter's Landing. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had somewhere else to go and chose it anyway. "I know what I'm going to do with it," she said. Her father looked at her. "You're going back to Kentucky," he said. Not a question. "I'm going back to Kentucky," she said. "And this man Carter." She looked at the document in her hands. "He gave me a coat on a dark road," she said. "And he didn't ask for it back. And every day since then, he has looked at me like I am exactly what I am, no more and no less, and asked nothing from me that I didn't want to give." She paused. "That's not a small thing, Papa." "No," her father said quietly. "It's not." She folded the document. She put it in the cedar box. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to her father's forehead, the way she had done as a child, and stayed there for a moment. "I'm going to arrange for Mrs. Carlyle to stay on," she said. "I'll send money from the land income once we have a tenant. You won't be alone." Her father's hand came up and pressed the back of her head gently, the way parents do when words have run out and touch is the only language left. "Clara," he said. "Yes, Papa." "I'm proud of you." She straightened. She did not cry. "I know," she said. "I can see it." She picked up the cedar box and took it with her when she left the room, because it was hers, and it had always been hers, and it was time to start treating things that belonged to her as things that belonged to her. She left for Kentucky the following morning. The road back felt entirely different from the road away. She had noticed that before in her life, how the same distance can feel like two different journeys, depending on what you are moving toward versus what you are leaving behind. The first time she had been running from a ballroom and a ring on a silver tray. This time she was moving toward something she had chosen with the full use of her faculties and all the information available to her. That was a different kind of motion entirely. She was 2 days out of Virginia when the coach stopped at a posting house to change horses, and she stepped outside into the cool morning air and looked south toward Kentucky, and felt for the first time in her memory the particular quality of stillness that means you are exactly where you are supposed to be going, exactly where you are supposed to go. Not because the world had arranged itself for her, because she had arranged herself for the world. She had learned her own worth, not from a man choosing her, but from the work of her own hands, the accuracy of her own numbers. The look on Mary Tanner's face when the debt cleared, the sound of Eliza reading aloud, the expression on Carter's face when she'd slid 3 pages of the night's work across the kitchen table and said, "I assumed you'd want to move quickly." She had learned it from the inside, and now it was hers. Not something that could be given or taken in a ballroom. Not something dependent on who chose her or who didn't. Hers, irrevocably. She climbed back into the coach. She opened her journal to a clean page. She wrote 3 words, not the same 3 words she had written in her room the night of Nathaniel's engagement party. Different ones. The words of a woman who had moved past, starting over and into something else entirely. She wrote, "I am home." Then she closed the journal, settled back in the seat, and let Kentucky come to her. She arrived back in Carter's Landing on a Tuesday afternoon, 11 days after she'd left. She didn't send word ahead. She hadn't planned to, partly because the road schedule was uncertain, partly because she wanted to arrive as herself, not as an event being prepared for. She wanted to step back into her life the way she'd built it, quietly, without ceremony, through the front door. The coach stopped at the main road. She stepped down with her bag and the cedar box and stood for a moment in the cool October air, just listening. The settlement sounded exactly as it always did. The mill turning slowly to the east, voices from the direction of the Tanner farm. The particular rhythm of a working place that has found its pace and kept it. She had been gone 11 days. It felt like she had never left. It felt like she had left and come back as someone slightly more complete. She was halfway down the main road when Thomas came out of the school at a run. Not because he had seen her, she realized, but because school had just ended, and then he looked up mid-stride and stopped dead in the road. "Miss Whitmore," he said. "Thomas," she said. "How did it go?" He fell into step beside her immediately, with the energy of a boy who has been managing something large and is desperate to report on it to the only person whose opinion he actually wants. "Good," he said. "Mostly good." Eliza finished the advanced reader. "I had to borrow it from Mr. Carter's study because we ran out of pages in the school copy. He said that was fine. There was a problem on Wednesday with the Henderson boys fighting in the yard, and I handled it." A pause. "I may have been slightly too loud about it." "How loud?" Clara asked. "Mr. Pruitt heard me from the field." Clara pressed her lips together. "But they stopped fighting," Thomas said quickly. "Then you handled it," she said. Thomas stood up slightly straighter. They reached Carter's house. Clara stopped at the porch steps, looked at Thomas. "You did well," she said. "Genuinely. I knew you would." Thomas looked at her with the expression of a boy who is 13 and therefore cannot show how much that means to him, but cannot quite hide it either. "Yes, ma'am," he said. And then, with a casualness that didn't fool either of them, "Mr. Carter asked about you, every day." I went before she could respond. She stood at the bottom of the porch steps for a moment, holding her bag and the cedar box, and felt her heart do something that was not complicated and not frightening and not uncertain at all. Then she went up. Carter was in the study when she knocked. She heard the pause, the particular quality of silence that means someone has stopped what they were doing and is deciding whether to believe what they think they heard. Then, "Come in." She opened the door. Howe was at his desk, and he had clearly been working, papers spread in front of him, pen in hand. But when he saw her, he set the pen down with the deliberate care of a man who is making sure he doesn't knock anything over, because his hands have suddenly become less reliable than usual. He stood. "You're back," he said. "I said before the first snow," she said. He looked at her. All of her the way he always did, not assessing, not calculating, just seeing. "How is your father?" he said. "Better. Mrs. Carlyle is staying on. The debt settlement is arranged." She set her bag down. kept the cedar box in her hands. "There's something I need to tell you." "Sit down," he said. "I'd rather stand," she said. "It'll be easier." He stayed where he was on his side of the desk and watched her with the steady patience that was one of the things she loved most about him, the fact that he never rushed a moment that deserved its full time. She told him about the trust, about the 40 acres, about her grandfather's box and her father's voice when he said it has always been yours, and the look on Eustace Pratt's face when she'd confirmed the legal standing of the land that Aldous Finch's claim couldn't reach. Carter listened without interrupting. When she finished, the room was quiet. 40 acres in Virginia, he said. "In my name," she said. Outright. He was quiet for another moment. "What are you going to do with it?" he asked. It was the same question she had asked herself in her father's bedroom. But from Carter, it had a different weight because Carter asked it without agenda. Not "will this change things," and not "will you leave," and not "what does this mean for me?" Just "what are you going to do with it?" "Rent it," she said. "There's a family in Henrico County, the Dunbar family. They've been farming adjacent land for years, and they've been waiting for the Whitmore parcel to come available. The income will cover my father's household and leave a remainder." She looked at him. "I don't need it to live on." Carter held her gaze. "Because you have a salary here," he said. "Because I have a life here," she said. "The salary is part of it." The distinction sat in the air between them. Carter came around the desk. Not quickly, nothing. Carter did was quick. It was one of the things that made him trustworthy, the fact that he never moved from impulse, but with the clear intention of someone who has decided something and is acting on it with his full self. He stopped in front of her. "Clara," he said. "William," she said. "I need to say something that I've been not saying for approximately 4 months." "I know," she said. "I'd like to say it anyway." "All right," she said. He looked at her straight without flinching, without performance. "I have been alone," he said, "for a long time. Not unhappily. I want to be clear about that. I built this place. I know these people. I have work I believe in. I wasn't waiting to be rescued. I wasn't looking." He paused. "And then a woman showed up on my road in Virginia in someone else's rain with a coat I handed her, because it was the right thing to do, and she brought it back because she said she would. And in 4 months, she has restructured my accounts, saved my land, run my school, faced down a Philadelphia land trust, and sent a man from Virginia home without letting me interfere." Another pause, shorter this time. "And I find that I would like to spend the rest of my life watching what you do next." Clara looked at him for a long, full moment. She felt everything she had carried for the last 8 months. The ballroom, the ring, the road south, the ledger at 2 a.m, the cedar box, the 40 acres. Her father's hand on the back of her head, and she felt it not as weight, but as history. The particular history that had made her exactly this person standing in this room, capable of hearing this from a man like this, and knowing with absolute clarity what was true. "William Carter," she said. "You gave me a coat and told me to build with what's left. You wrote my father a letter when you didn't have to. You hired me for work instead of charity. You read my 3 pages at 6 a.m. and said thank you, like it was the right size of word." She held his gaze. "You have been seeing me clearly since the first night I met you. That is not a small thing. That is in fact the only thing that has ever mattered." He reached up and took her face in both hands. Careful the way he did everything, deliberate and warm and entirely without performance. "Is that a yes?" he said. "That is an absolute yes," she said. He kissed her, not dramatically, not the way it happens in stories told to impress. Quietly, with the fullness of 2 people who have been moving toward each other for months and have finally decided to stop navigating around the fact and simply arrive. When they separated, Clara was aware of 2 things simultaneously: the particular quality of the afternoon light coming through the study window and the sound of Ruth Hadley's footsteps in the kitchen, which had a distinct rhythm that suggested she had been listening from the hallway and was now walking away with the satisfied speed of a woman who has been waiting for this exact moment since approximately October of last year. "Ruth knew," Clara said. "Ruth has known since the first week you arrived," Carter said. "She never said anything." "Ruth doesn't say things," Carter said. She just stays in the doorway a little longer than necessary." Clara laughed. Really laughed, the kind that comes from relief and joy, and the absurdity of two careful people taking 4 months to say obvious things. Carter was smiling. A full one. She had not seen that before. It changed his face entirely, opened it, made it younger, made it something she wanted to look at for a very long time. "William," she said. "Yeah." "Ruth is going to be insufferable about this." "Absolutely," he said. "There is no way to prevent it." She stepped back just far enough to breathe properly. "I want to talk about the school," she said. "I have ideas about what comes next. The Tanner children need advanced materials, and I think we can expand to take on students from the Fleming settlement if we build an additional room on the east side." "Clara," he said, "and the accounting system needs to be reorganized by quarter rather than by harvest, because the current structure creates gaps in the fourth." "Clara," he said again, with the patient, warm, slightly exasperated tone of a man who is learning what it means to be loved by someone who does not slow down. She stopped. He was looking at her with an expression that was full of something she recognized, now the exact quality of seeing that she had been looking for her entire life without knowing it had a name. "Tomorrow," he said. "All of that is tomorrow." She looked at him. "All right," she said. "Tomorrow." The news moved through Carter's Landing, the way all significant news did, faster than anyone admitted, and with more accuracy than anyone expected. By Wednesday morning, Ruth had said nothing to anyone technically, but had made a second cup of coffee without being asked. When Carter and Clara sat down at the same time at the kitchen table, which was in Ruth Hadley's vocabulary equivalent to a public announcement, by Wednesday afternoon, Pruitt had appeared at the study door, looked at Carter, looked at Clara, looked back at Carter, and said simply, "Good," before going back to the field without further ceremony. By Thursday, Thomas had told Eliza, who had told her mother, who had told Mary Tanner, who had said according to Ruth's second-hand account. Well, of course, any fool could have seen that was coming. Clara found this information more pleasing than she expected. She was at the school on Thursday, when Eliza appeared at her elbow after the reading lesson with the careful casualness of a 9-year-old who has something important to say and is trying to find the right approach. "Miss Whitmore," Eliza said. "Yes, Eliza." "My mother says you and Mr. Carter are going to get married." Clara kept her expression composed. "Does she?" "She says it's good because you're smart, and he needs someone smart." "That's very practical of your mother." Eliza considered this. Then, with the directness of a child who has not yet learned to dress her real thoughts up in manners, "Are you going to stay?" "After some people leave when they get married." Clara looked at her, at this small, serious-eyed girl who had walked into this school unable to read a full paragraph, and now finished books, who had absorbed knowledge with the intensity of someone who understood instinctively that it was the most portable and permanent thing in the world. "Eliza," Clara said, "I am going to stay. This is where I live. This is where I work. Those things aren't going to change because of who I marry." Eliza nodded, satisfied. Then she went back to her book. Clara stood at the front of the empty classroom for a moment after the children filed out and felt the particular quiet joy of a life that was exactly what she had made it. Nothing accidental, nothing borrowed, nothing contingent on someone else's choice about her worth. She had built this. She was staying in it. The letter that arrived the following week was not from Nathaniel. It was from his father, Harlan Ashford. Clara recognized the Ashford seal on the outside and opened it with the calm of a woman who has genuinely stopped being afraid of things that used to frighten her. Harlan Ashford was dying. He did not say it that directly. He was Harlan Ashford, and he had been managing the presentation of information his entire life, but it was clear enough between the formal sentences. His health had declined significantly. The Ashford estate was being restructured. Nathaniel was managing the transition, and the Pemberton marriage, which had not yet been formally completed, was under renegotiation due to disagreements about the terms of the Ashford land consolidation. None of that was why Harlan had written. He had written because of a single paragraph near the end of the letter, which Clara read twice and then set on the table and did not pick up again. He wrote, I am told, Miss Whitmore, that you have distinguished yourself considerably in Kentucky, that you resolved a significant land dispute, restructured a settlement's financial position, and built a school that serves a growing community. I confess I underestimated you. I believe my son did as well. I am writing not to ask for anything, as I understand we forfeited any such right. I am writing because I am running out of time to say the things I should have said, and because I believe that acknowledgement, when it is genuine, costs the person giving it nothing, and means more than they expect to the person receiving it. You were the right choice, Miss Whitmore. You were always the right choice. Clara sat with this for a long moment. She thought about Harlan Ashford standing at the center of his ballroom with his white hair and his commanding voice, and his certainty that he was conducting the correct transaction. She thought about what it must have cost him, this man who had managed everything, to write this letter. To say I was wrong when there was nothing left to gain from saying it. She thought that is what integrity looks like when it arrives too late. Not useless exactly, but too late. She picked up her pen. She wrote back. Briefly. She thanked him for the letter. She told him she bore him no ill will. She told him truthfully that she was well and happy and building something she was proud of. She did not say you should have stopped your son. She did not say you could have changed everything. There was no point. He knew. That was why he had written. She sent the letter. Then she went to find Carter. He was at the paddock fence talking to Pruitt about the winter feed supply, and he turned when he heard her footsteps, with the particular attentiveness of a man who has started listening for someone's approach without knowing when that habit formed. She handed him Harlan Ashford's letter. He read it. When he finished, he folded it and handed it back without a word. "Are you all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. And it was true, completely, uncomplicatedly true. "I just wanted you to know." "I know," he said. Pruitt, with his characteristic tact, had become suddenly very interested in the fence post to his left. Carter looked at her. "Does it change anything?" he asked. Not challenging, just asking. "No," she said. "It confirms everything." He nodded. He reached out and tucked a loose piece of hair back from her face. A small gesture, domestic and unhurried. The kind that belongs to people who have decided to be in the same life together, and then went back to talking to Pruitt about winter feed, as though the world had not just quietly, perfectly settled into its right order. Clara stood at the paddock fence for a moment, watching him. She thought about the blue dress she had left on her bed in Virginia. She thought about the ring on the silver tray. She thought about the dark road and the coat and build with what's left. She thought about the ledger at 2 a.m, and Gerald Holt's face when she said 40 yards, and Thomas running across the road, and Eliza reading her first paragraph, and the cedar box, and her grandfather's handwriting, and 40 acres that had always been hers. She thought about this man at this fence, who had never once in 4 months looked at her and seen anything less than exactly what she was. And she thought, this is what it looks like when you stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing. This is what it looks like when you build something from the inside. This is what it looks like when the right life finds you. Not because you held still and waited, but because you moved toward it with everything you had, and it recognized you coming, and it opened. 6 months later, Clara Whitmore married William Carter in the yard outside the school she had built in front of every person in Carter's Landing, and a dozen neighbors from the Fleming settlement, and Mary Tanner, who cried through the entire ceremony with the complete lack of embarrassment of a woman who has earned the right to her feelings. Thomas stood in the back with his arms crossed and the expression of someone trying very hard not to cry, which meant he was in fact crying. Eliza had insisted on reading a passage aloud during the ceremony, a paragraph from the land management book that Clara had brought from Virginia, the one about building with what the earth gives you rather than what you wish it would give you. Clara had agreed immediately, which had scandalized Ruth and delighted everyone else. Eliza read it clearly without stopping, with the full, unself-conscious confidence of a girl who has learned that her voice is worth hearing. Ruth Hadley made the wedding cake and refused to let anyone help. Pruitt said at dinner that evening that he had known since the first week, and Carter told him that was impossible, and Pruitt said simply, "I'm never wrong about these things." And Carter looked at Clara, and Clara looked back at him with the shared private understanding of two people who are now in possession of a happiness so solid that other people's opinions of it simply pass through without finding purchase. At the end of the evening, when the yard had gone quiet, and the last guests had made their way home, and Ruth had gone to bed with the satisfaction of a woman who has watched something she believed in reach its correct conclusion, Carter and Clara sat on the porch in the October dark. The river was just audible to the east. The mill was still, somewhere across the settlement. A light burned in the schoolroom. She had left a lamp habit in case anyone came early tomorrow, and the sight of it small and steady in the dark filled her chest with something she had no need to name because she felt it completely. Carter reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically. The way he did everything simply with intention, without asking for more than the moment contained. "You know," he said, "you never asked me what happened to me, before, why I was alone." She looked at him. "I know," she said. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." He was quiet for a moment. "There was someone," he said. "Years ago, she chose a wealthier man. Her father arranged it. She didn't fight it." He said it without bitterness, just the plain factual tone of a man reporting the weather from a storm that has long since passed. "I built this place after. I told myself I was done with it." "And now," she said. He turned to look at her. "And now," he said, "I understand that I wasn't done. I was waiting for something I couldn't have described, something that would come through a door I hadn't thought to open." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "You gave a stranger your coat in the rain," she said. "I did," he said. "That's the door," she said. "You opened it that night. You just didn't know what was going to walk through." Carter looked at her, and then he smiled that full, open smile that she had first seen on a Kentucky morning, and had been collecting ever since, the way you collect the things that make you understand what it means to be alive. "No," he said. "I didn't know." He brought her hand up and pressed his lips to it briefly, the way you mark something you intend to keep. The October night moved around them, cool and full and quiet. The lamp burned steady in the schoolroom across the road, and Clara Whitmore, who had stood in a ballroom in a blue dress and placed a ring on a silver tray and walked out into the dark, alone sat on her own porch, in her own life, beside the man who had always seen her clearly and understood with the complete, unshakable certainty of someone who has built a thing with her own hands, that this, exactly,